I'll keep things moving along. Our next speaker is Christopher A. Daniel. He's an instructor of journalism at Clark Atlanta University.
Good morning. Everybody feeling good so far? Yeah. All right, so good job, welcome. I was always someone, I grew up in Spartanburg, South Carolina, so kind of like Minneapolis. Not really a big, strong African-American presence. You have one or two black radio stations there, but I actually spent a lot of time as a kid, you know, watching MTV and really seeing like all the culture clubs and the Duran Durans, but really being sucked into that. But then all of a sudden, Lionel Richie and Michael Jackson and Prince and Tina Turner, you start to really see all these really cool black people and black superstars coming. But I also, you know, study album liner notes and really being in the loop of, wow, this person did all of this, or this person's frequency was here, and then the fonts, and then looking at all this really cool stuff. So over the course of time, one of the things that I noticed is that from the first 11 records, that was literally like Prince's golden era. So each record literally got more progressive, everything got more experimental, it got more interesting, the brand got a little bit tighter. So as we started to see the promotion for this, I thought about it, I said, wow, you know, throughout the course of those first 11 records, things got a little bit more brave, he got a little bit more innovative, and things got a little bit more concrete. So I came up with this particular experience, The Latest Fashion. So does anybody know where this title comes from? Absolutely. Which album? Which album? Correct. So of course, you know, just kind of looked at just the correlation between the clothes and kind of the look that he had in conjunction with the sort of musical styles and experimentation and how all that stuff kind of evolved. So of course, let's hop in. April 4th, 1978. Teenage kid, fresh out of Minnesota, could play any and every instrument known to man. But doesn't he kind of look like Dwayne from What's Happening? But needless to say, you know, when Prince was first signed to the label Warner Brothers in 1977, one of the first things that he made clear to his A&Rs at the label was, do not market me as black. Do not market me as black. And what does that mean? You know, we're coming from a city where it's literally between 7 and 11% African American, so the presence of black people is really not there. And again, like me, the level of black radio stations and access was very minimal. But also you have all these different, you know, styles of music, you know, all the pop and the album-oriented rock, which he was absorbing all of that stuff. But then you have the James Browns and the Earth, Wind and Fires and the Sly Stones and the Carlos Santanas and the George Clintons. All this stuff was coming in. So this was literally a guy who said, I can do this. So literally locking himself in the studio, writing, playing, producing, arranging, and that beautiful falsetto voice that we hear and we've come to love. So this first album that you see, of course, soft and wet, you know, just a little fresh, little out of the box, you know, just kind of like teeny bopper music, but still just soft enough to get the point across, you know, it's sexual. But also we have things like I'm Yours, which is more of a kind of poppy crossover style record with a really nice rock riff. Then of course, Just As Long As We're Together, which is more disco, very percussive. But the biggest thing here is really trying to get the word out that here's this kid who is really like akin to this guy. That golden period again, from Music of My Mind all the way up to Songs in the Key of Life and Journey to the Secret Life of Plants, right? Again, every album got more brave, the subject matter got more clear, but literally this guy literally mastering the art of voice and song and playing everything. So literally Prince was literally in comparison to this guy, but not really a whole lot you can really say about the clothes and attire necessarily, but the biggest thing was, let's just get the word out about this guy. He can play. And of course, you know, it cracked the top 200, but it really wasn't a strong showing on the chart. But the point was, here's this guy you got to watch out for. Now, the hair gets a little straighter. Now, how many of y'all wore y'all hair like this too back in 1979, 1980? Looking pretty good, right? So August 19, 1979, the sophomore effort. Everyone knows about the sophomore jinx. We're coming with this second record. Can you top the first one? And a strong answer is yes. First single, I Want to Be Your Lover, top 20 pop record. #1 R&B single, sold 1 million copies, album went platinum. But then again, here we are again, back to his original point. I can play anything. So most of the records that you hear on that record, whether it's Why You Want to Treat Me So Bad, When We're Dancing Close and Slow, which is one of my favorites, Bambi, which is another kind of album-oriented rock record, Still Waiting, It's Gonna Be Lonely. All of these were literally kind of pop-influenced sounding music. It wasn't really black, funky stuff other than I Want to Be Your Lover, right? Of course, you guys go to the discotheque, you dance, you put on your heels and get real cute. But again, still making the point of I am this brilliant musician who can play. And right around this time also, in terms of style, I remember having a conversation about 2 years ago with Andre Simone. We literally had a Skype interview because he had just put a record out. And how many of you guys remember the American Bandstand performance? Pretty memorable television moment, correct? But one of the things that you definitely remember was Prince wearing those gold pants, and that's when you really started to see the heels. His peach shirt was on, but he was playing the guitar. But next to him was Andre Simone with these clear pants. These clear, thin, slim fit pants. And I asked him, I said, what was the whole swag like? How did you guys get to that point? You know, and one of the things that he told me, he said he was so happy I asked it because he still has those pants to this day. But the interesting thing about those pants and just the clothes was they would go to little boutiques or they would go to consignment stores and just pick whatever they thought would just get eyes on them. So when they saw those pants, he actually has like 3 pairs of those pants, by the way. But those pants were things that he thought would really catch attention. So when you guys think back to the tours or think back to those shows, and also he was on tour with Rick James around this time too. So when you think back to those shows, you really kind of catch a glimpse of him just still kind of having his chest out, but really not really having an identity per se with the clothes. But again, the music is what stood out and more attention was paid to him. He cracked the top 40 on the chart, again, million-selling album, and of course a little bit more fanfare. But again, you know, disco sucks, then we go through all of that stuff, and something kind of shifted in music. But in 1980, something was in the water, wasn't it? Now, one of the things I want us to really think about in 1980, right? The first #1 record that year was Rock With You by Michael Jackson. So literally bleeding from 1979 to 1980, there's a black artist that's literally atop the chart. So in terms of pop radio, it was a bit of a questionable situation going on. Other than someone like Michael Jackson or Donna Summer, you really didn't see a whole lot of a strong black presence in the top 10. But in terms of the alt-rock side of things, here's this guy again stepping up his game. So most of the music critics kind of got on board with this because the music was really raw. If you go back and listen to that record, it sounds like demos. It's a strong echo in it. It's very stripped down rock and roll. Reason being that this record was recorded in Prince's home. So it's a strong echo in the attic, and it wasn't a lot of really heavy, like slick mixes, and that was intentional. Prince was a huge fan of punk music. Very, very strong fan of punk. You gotta also remember, this guy was signed to Warner Brothers, so right across the hall is literally like the Talking Heads, which was really coming from that whole Max Kansas City, CBGB sort of alt situation in New York City, right? If you want to go see, you know, a really cool band, whether it was a Blondie or someone like that, you had to literally go to the other side of New York City, and Prince was a staple around this time. But also, too, one of the things that happened, too, around this time is he really started to develop his band, and one of the biggest things was he knew he wanted to have a mix of musicians. He wanted white women, he wanted black men, but he also wanted people that kind of had this kind of outlook about themselves where you didn't know what they were playing. You had a cool keyboard player who was dressed like the damn Hamburglar, but y'all remember Dr. Fink was wearing the stripes looking like the Hamburglar, right? And I remember him telling me as well, too, Prince was asking, so what is your look gonna be? At the time, he didn't know that the scrub thing was gonna be the thing, but the biggest thing was he just wanted some, again, to catch your attention. So the stripes playing that synthesizer was really the way to do it. But then, of course, too, looking at the subject matter was very direct in your face. You know, we're talking about oral sex on Head, which was very graphic. We're talking about incest on Sister, but we're also talking about Do It All Night, you know, a high libido, right? But then we have this one ballad, Got a Broken Heart Again. But then we can funk it up with Head and Uptown, but Uptown was also this really interesting place, right? This really cool out-of-the-box space where you can just be who you are, you can be liberated, and it definitely showcased showcased in the band. Look at this guy, you know, briefs, a scarf tied around his neck, trench coat, heels. You couldn't get no more punkish than that, right? And also, too, some of the influences. There's actually some really, really cool, like, sound bites on YouTube, if you can catch it, of Prince playing Train in Vain on tour, which is one of the songs off of London Calling, which is also one of my favorite albums. But also, again, Talking Heads, who was also signed to Warner Brothers around the same time that he was, but then Television, which is another one of my favorite bands, but really pulling from these kind of alternative groups that really had a voice, but it was really just making very stripped down rock and roll. And again, Prince being this guy was like, I could do that too. So again, we're going from AM album-oriented rock to now we're doing more stripped down new wave funk. And of course, he made the jokes, of course, over the years saying we don't like new wave, which we knew was kind of tongue in cheek, but he could play that stuff. And also too, one thing I want us to also note, when we start to look at, you know, Prince's choice in clothes, everyone in here wears earrings, everyone in here wears accessories, everyone here wears watches, everyone here wears rings. Look at this as earrings, look at this as watches. So you really start to see, you know, what's called the Tele or the Telecaster. Now everyone notices, you know, the little like the animal printed strap. And then there's this maple actual body of it, which really became a staple in his whole design, right? So no different than you seeing Janet Jackson in the late 90s with that key in her earring. That was literally the same sort of thing, right? But beautiful matching leopard print, but the durability of the instrument, you know, he moves around playing like Hendrix and Carlos Santana was really light. So one of the reasons why you see this is because it's a very, very light instrument. And of course, it got a little bit more sophisticated over the years, but we'll definitely go into that as well. And of course, we go from being a critic's favorite to continuing that whole kind of thing of I'm still a critic's favorite. Now, we're still kind of getting a little remnants of new wave, a little bit more remnants of funk, and a little bit more remnants of hard rock. We're not quite into the MTV thing quite yet, even though MTV came August 1st, 1981. This was literally like probably 2 months after, but the cool thing about it is look at the sort of background that you see, the newspapers and the headlines, and even the fact that he kind of dressed up a little bit more. That's when he started wearing the trousers and started wearing the shirt, because now we're getting into more serious issues. And this was really the first record that Prince really pegged himself as kind of socially conscious, right? So on Anti-Christian, for example, we're talking about the Atlanta child murders. We're addressing John Lennon being shot. We're looking at ab scam. You know, we're looking at all these interesting things, birth control even, like all these different things, and really milking the metaphor. Anti-Christian was a metaphor for evil and how it kind of lurks society and kill us and just mess us up, right? So anti-Christian, anti-Christian, anti-Christ, anti-Christ. So we're really looking at kind of how he was able to flip that, but also doing different things like Do Me Baby, which is a ballad. You know, controversy. I'm addressing all these different things that people say about me, whether it's my sexual orientation, how I look, how do I worship, how do I play. So really looking at all these different critical issues on record, but we're also doing a little bit more disruptive sounds. Right, you know, we're addressing Ronald Reagan when Ronnie talked to Russia, but we're also doing things like Jack You Off, you know, and then looking at stuff like Private Joy, which is still rather sexual and rather gratuitous, but then we funk it up again with less work. Probably one of the baddest bass lines you'll ever hear on a Prince record. And if you ever hear Michelle Ndegeocello play that joint, she kills it. But then also too, look at this, we're still kind of in that whole punky, grungy phase, right? You see, again, the newspapers, right? We're addressing the issues, but also think about the sort of lighting and the sort of stained glass windows that you saw where it's still kind of overtly spiritual and really tapping into that whole site. Prince was really very forward thinking in terms of really using this platform to speak on the issues. And of course, you know, you'll see it further down the line, but really taking it upon himself to use his music as a vehicle to really attack all these different issues. And again, cracked the top 40 on the album chart and certified platinum somewhere down the line. But it wasn't until we get here where we really start to see the identity sort of flip. Look to your left, you see Morris Day and the Time. They have more fly suits on, it's a little bit slicker, but they have a lot of playalistic sort of lingo in the actual lyrics and on wax. That was Prince's way of really developing that more pimp side to himself. And one of the things that Morris Day told me about 3 years ago, he said, we were inspired by the pimps in Minnesota. They were some of the flyest jokers we ever saw. So they're really borrowing from this kind of whole gangster film sort of area as well. Okay. So we're really looking at this and also looking at Vanity 6 and, you know, kind of the sexual side to him in that regard. 1982, MTV is the new medium. Now he realizes that he can really go into that zone where he's the pop star. So now the look is starting to get a little bit more crystal clear. But then also too, that was the crossover record, right? Little Red Corvette peaks in the top 10. 1999 gets re-released and it hits the top 20. Delirious comes out, that's a big single. You know, Platinum cracked the top 10, MTV kicks butt. But also look at the band and look at the whole image of the revolution and what that is, right? That's the first time we saw the revolution. And this is what Brown Mark told me literally just last year. He said the revolution was literally created around the time of the 1999 record. Anything before that is total garbage. But he also patterned this band after Sly and the Family Stone and Fleetwood Mac. So that's why you kind of see the whole like mix that you see. But also, again, going back to those earrings and those bracelets, the Lindrum, never been used the same until you started to see him do that. And also, too, with the OBX synth, same sort of effect. But also, too, borrowing from electro-funk that was really coming. You know, Kraftwerk with their trippy sort of percussive nature. Looking at Devo, who was also another label mate at Warner Brothers, doing their kind of trippy stuff, but also Africa Bombarded and the Soul Sonic Force and all the stuff that Arthur Baker was doing really fed into the whole kind of cold, minimalist sound that you hear, but also 70-some-odd minutes worth of undying, long-winded, exhaustive, booty-shaking funk. Now, right here, this is really where it hits, right? He was a superstar. Multi-millions of albums, Grammys, he's the star of the show, literally making it a point. Now, you can't help but to see him this time. He's literally like the pop star. But again, this is the part where I want to get to because this is where the fashion kicks in. Now, look at the buttons, look at the square shoulders, look at the patterns, looking like that sort of regal, sort of military sort of look. That was Prince really playing up the fact that he was royal, that he was the commander-in-chief. He was the leader out front. These two brothers right here are very important. Anytime you see Louis and Vaughn and Marie France, this is exactly who they're referring to. They actually came on board around 1981 during the Controversy tour, and they were brought in by Cavallo, Ruffalo, and Fagnoli, which were the managers. And at the time, they were the costume designers for Earth, Wind, and Fire. They did the whole Egyptian spiritual look, so they came in and said, we need a look for Prince because he is going to be big. So they were the ones that came up with that whole kind of square look, the ruffled shirts, the Egyptian silk, all of this stuff that you see on this body, the asymmetric buttons across the front, all of this stuff, and also too, Marie France, this is another important person that you need to know. Anytime you see these names and you see the sort of look that came in when he literally became the cultural icon and the fashion plate, those three people were the people responsible for that. So now the brand is really popping. Also to the Rusan Cloud by David Rusan. Now this is the guitar that you know and you love. This was actually inspired by a bass that they saw in a random store in LA during the 1979-1980 season, where they literally repurposed it and made it a body for him. And so you saw all those different colors over the years. Another #1 album, but you didn't really see a whole lot of visibility from him that year. One thing that you might want to note was that was his benevolent period also. That was him really doing all his charitable stuff. One of the cool things I heard was in Atlanta when they came for the Purple Rain tour, it was nothing for Prince to do a canned food drive or anything like that, but they were actually in a mall. Coincidentally, they were playing at the Omni, and they ran into Bruce Springsteen at the mall, and he was being mobbed just as much as they were. But also, too, he was one of those funders in the King holiday video that they shot right around this time, too, so that was literally during that whole time, too. But again, still, Louis Vuitton, Marie France, that sort of look, but the whole Around the World in a Day mix was more psychedelic, a little bit more of a mix. And the whole look behind it was never really to be inspired by the Beatles, per se. It was just a way for him to kind of escape being so visible, because he was so huge at the time and he was tired. So he was really just trying to do something that kind of threw him off the grid just a little bit, but still kind of something for us fans. So this music was more experimental, had more Middle Eastern influences, had more of a symphonic touch to it, but it was still just enough for him to be a little risky and to do his thing. And I moved through this pretty fast. I know I'm pressed for time. A little bit of high fashion with Under the Cherry Moon. Of course, we're in Nice. A little bit more sophisticated. Claire Fisher comes on and starts arranging the strings. You know, we have a little bit more high fabric, a little bit more of the good life. Even though some of us missed the mark with the film and didn't like it, this was by far one of his most joyful projects, as my colleague in the back said. You know, way more of a mix. It was way more collaborative from the band, but this was also a time, too, when the Revolution was starting to expand, but it was the last album that the Revolution actually had. But then again, it's still one of the flyest joints you'll ever see. my favorite album. My favorite album. And also too, you know, just a great mix, really trying to get back out to the front, but also doing some of the most ambitious work they'll ever do. Literally every style of music is on this record, and he perfects it. But also during the whole Dream Factory Crystal Ball sections, this is what we got. But nonetheless, it was cool because also, you know, he was too productive, which is really where a lot of the whole label problems were, the fact that he produced so much and they couldn't hold it, they couldn't market it, they didn't know how to put that stuff out. So that was really where a lot of the disconnect was, but again, it was a gamble trying to make this a double record, but you know, condensing it down to a point where there is R&B, there's psychedelica, there's soul music, there's pop. We're addressing hip hop, we're addressing AIDS, we're addressing, you know, the Challenger exploding, but really being able to do something where I'm showing, again, more of my conscious side, but more of me out front, but really showing that I'm literally one of the best artists on the planet. And also right before Public Enemy and NWA and hip hop really took shape, this was the last album by a black artist that really penetrated the world of music. The Battle of Good and Evil, you know, we're coming out of the whole Black album. And I'm gonna stop right here because they're telling me it's my time. But needless to say, this was the Battle of Good and Evil, and we're coming out of a situation where we've kind of seen the good, the bad, the ugly, the success, the low point, but right here is really where we're trying to purify and come back to who we were. And of course, I wanted to stop right here as well because the Batman soundtrack was literally the end of that golden period, I think. But also, this is the turning point because, again, back to the #1 charts, back doing our thing, but also, again, that Good and Evil with the Gemini, you know, model that you saw in the video. So we'll open up for Q&A in just a second, and thank you so much for your time.